So I hope in the way that we've introduced the scriptures today that you have kind of captured the vision of this story. It is one of our foundational stories, and I think it's a very human story. Every person, whether we like to admit it or not, has this internal struggle going on in us between living in fear and living in love. Perhaps it's even living in fear and living in hope. One of my favorite stories, and I know I've told it to you several times, but was of the grandfather who was walking with his grandson, and the grandfather said, "I feel like I have two wolves in my soul that are fighting with each other. And one is an angry wolf and that wants to fight and be mean, and one is a loving wolf that wants to be peaceful and filled with joy." And the grandson said, "Grandfather, which wolf will win?" And grandfather said, "The one I feed." In our thoughts, in what we watch on television, in what we surround ourselves with, in the way we make conversation, all of these things feed one of the wolves in us. We can feed fear, or we can feed hope. This is such a fundamental human story. But it is also not just an individual story. It is also, as the book of Exodus tells us, a community story. They went to extreme lengths in the story of Exodus to skirt around, to take the people who were traveling. And in one of the places in the scripture that we didn't read, it says there was 2 million of these Egyptians. And that's a huge number. And can you imagine leading those numbers? The folks who look at this story says actually the word that was used in its original meaning meant a household unit. And so probably there was more like 2,000 to 3,000 people who escaped using that word in its old meaning, rather than 2 million. But these 2,000 people as a community, they had to help each other. And the leadership had to help them to not turn back into slavery because fear got hold. Fear can take hold in a community. We'd rather have the certainty of where we have been rather than the uncertainty of what could be a hope. This is our faith story. This is the soul's work to do in the soul of a community. I'm watching Brexit on the news these days. Don't you wonder what's going to happen? And how is the leadership going to cope to take Britain and to give it some semblance of wholeness? I think about that as we talk about exploring amalgamation with Cadborough Bay. How do we equip each one of us and the whole community to choose to cross over rather than to live with the uncertainty that we have now of reducing energy and money? These are human questions. And they're ones that we have, I believe, the capacity to face, to be alive to know that, like the Hebrew people, there are in our past choice moments when we had to decide. Now, you get the point. I don't need to belabor it. I think the key thing is that we begin to, or our key thing, is that we begin to talk to each other and within our community to begin to feed the sense of ourselves as risk takers, as people of courage, as people who are as smart as we know ourselves to be, and therefore can see what is before us. Tell ourselves stories of courage, of our capacity to trust the cloud, the pillar of light. And when we do that, we won't be inventing anything new. We'll simply be duplicating what happened in the story of Exodus to our ancestors in faith so long ago, who kept their eye on the cloud during day and the fire during night that would lead them to a new place. Well, that's our story. So, let's travel on. Thank you for listening.